So, who actually voted and elected George Washington the first president? That was a question. Email. That's okay. That's good. Because I like questions. You know what I don't like, though? And I'm going to tell you. Actually, this should be titled Who Didn't Vote for George Washington, but we'll get to that later. I have over 31 views on my channel, and I think that's pretty good. For less than 90 days, I'm pretty ecstatic. I have 25 subscribers. I think that's nice too. Some of you are not subscribing though. Some of you are in my family. It does not cost anything to subscribe on YouTube. They're not going to charge you a fortune for the football package. Okay, this is free. If you want more of my content, which could be helpful to you or your children or your students or anything else, you got to subscribe. You don't, all you have to do is subscribe once. So there's I like this idea. If you've seen more than one of my videos, then you certainly should subscribe if this is your second one. But let's go on. All right. Before we had the U.S. Constitution, we had this piece of crap called the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Very loosely helped the U.S. didn't help the U.S. Congress do anything. Basically, all the U.S. Congress could do was to ask states for support. They could print money, and boy, they did $200 million worth. Not that it helped because it was worthless with the inflation of the war and all. So we needed a new fix. After the war and the bands play the world turned upside down at Yorktown, we came into the being of the perils of peace. And slowly but surely, this country started going off the edge. And mostly because of a lack of a strong central government. States had all the power, which is not a bad thing. It's just off balance. They had no ability to raise money. If you mention taxes during with the Continental Congress under the Articles of Confederation, all it took was, well, actually, you had to be unanimous. Everybody had to approve a tax. So everybody had to be in line. If you wanted to make an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, one vote shut you down. That's it. So nothing got done. Nothing got done. At the end of the war in 1781, after the Treaty of Versailles was signed, yeah, there was talk of let's just go ahead and trash that. Sorry about that. Trash those Articles of Confederation and let's just, do like Europe, become 13 separate little countries. Yeah. Other people had other ideas, thankfully. James Madison was one. He's a Virginian who was a lawyer. James Madison, the little Virginian, he's got trunks full of examples of Confederates and governments working from the ancients, like the Greek, through the Holy Roman Empire, the Swiss, the provinces of the Netherlands. He knows all their weaknesses and all their strengths. In late October 1786, Mr. Madison pulled up to Mount Vernon and spent a day or so with George Washington. Both Washington and Madison foresaw the collapse of the Articles of Confederation, and both agreed it had to be scrapped and a new government had to be formed. George Washington did not wish to see that the sacrifice he made and all those who had fallen and who had been wounded or disabled or the families thereof for that war to go in vain just to have a government collapse. Much to his surprise, in November of that year, 1786, he was named to lead the delegates from the Commonwealth of Virginia to Philadelphia and the Constitutional Convention. He was unaware that his name was placed in there, but probably placed in there by James Madison, let's face it. And he didn't really want to go. He was trying to wiggle out of that, saying, I've already served. It's time for someone else. But the Virginia governor reminded him that with his participation, George Washington's, the rest of the nation would see the sincereness and the validity of this convention, why we need it. Basically, the nation would trust George Washington. That must have worked, because then he later wrote Madison and said, I'll see you in Philadelphia. So Washington goes up there and he's elected the president of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. And they go ahead and they write the Constitution. Generally speaking, James Madison does. He is considered the father of the Constitution. They created um, three branches of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judicial. They created how they would be elected. They did not create who would elect them. That was up to the states to regulate who they picked to be electors. Here comes the part that, not everybody likes. Who didn't vote for George Washington? In 1789, only 5 states allowed their citizens to vote for presidential electors. In 3 states, the state legislature picked the electors. In New Jersey, the governor and an executive council, they picked the electors. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, they did a little bit of both. They did popular and legislation. So somehow they picked them from that group. The states of North Carolina and Rhode Island had not ratified the Constitution. So they didn't send anybody. Then New York, being New York, couldn't decide what to do, so they missed out on the vote altogether. They didn't send anybody to vote. 2 of the electors from Virginia and 2 of them from Maryland got stuck in severe weather, so they didn't make it to the vote for president. There was really no campaigning for president because there was no platform. And pretty much as I said, the position of president was basically created for George Washington. George Washington wasn't elected for what he stood for. He was elected for who he was. He had 69 votes for the office of presidency. Basically, this was a unanimous vote for the office of presidency. John Adams received the second amount, 34. So, by the Constitution in 1789, just newly written, he became the vice president. There is some word about Alexander Hamilton maybe doing some backdoor stuff, but there was really no question that George Washington was going to be elected president. And the thing was, he was supposed to be considered the one that the office was created for. Initially, he didn't want to take a salary of the $25,000 that they created for him. He said, "No, I'll do this job. I think for my expenses." And they had to convince him. The members of Congress and his friends, and later some of them on his cabinet. No, you need to be paid. You need to take the money because don't want the rest of the world and our own citizenry to think that we only want rich people to be the president or a rich man or a rich white man. Let's be serious, it's the 18th century. So on February 4th, 1789, when the Electoral College convened, and that's why we had that, they were the first electors, they voted for president. And for some strange reason, I don't know why, but it took all the way to April 6th for them to count and certify the vote, but they pretty much knew who it was. So George Washington won the election. John Adams was going to be the vice president. And that was it. George had to borrow money because he was what you call property rich, cash poor. So Martha, she didn't go with him right away. She said, "No, I'll just wait until you get a place up in New York City because that's where the first capital of the United States was, New York City. I'll just wait for you to make sure we have a place to stay, and then you send word." Plus, she knew that every little road stop on the way up there, he was going to have a party to go to. People were going to yell, wave, fireworks, bands playing. She probably didn't want to get caught in that. And that's nice and all. But like I said, who elected the electors? I'll tell you who didn't. So this is part two. Who didn't elect George Washington? In some states, Catholics, Jews, and Quakers were barred from electing. The majority of the electors in all states, you got it, you had to be white and you had to be a man of majority age, so 21 or 2, and you had to be a property owner. So here's who didn't vote for George Washington: women, slaves, free African American, Native Americans, Jews, Catholics, and some Quakers. Ah, so already you're probably thinking, well, this doesn't sound like a very good U.S. Constitution. It's the best they had. And besides, the preamble says, we're going to strive to make a more perfect union. This thing is a growing thing. It continues to move on through history and it grows from it. They started making amendments like the 12th Amendment that says we got to fix this election process. For a long time, senators were elected by state legislatures. It wasn't until like 1913 that the public started voting for their own senators from each state, not just their representatives. So, if you weren't a property owner and you weren't a white male over the age of majority, you're not voting. Once again, if you like my stuff and like my content, you want to see more of it, and you want to answer questions or sometimes find new questions to ask about history, and sometimes you can't find it anywhere. And I got to tell you, this one's hard to find because you can't find it on the internet, but I have books that are written about this stuff. Like for you to subscribe. Hope you enjoyed it. Well, that's history. It's all in the past. See you tomorrow when we talk about today. Remember to subscribe. You know who you are.